I've got to sit very still because I've got these dots of sunlight coming through the window and they tend to shine on my face. And I got another one over here, and so I got to sit right in the middle. So I'm going to sit very still through this entire presentation. But one of the things that people with autism struggle with is that sense of worth or that sense of placement. Where do I belong in the world? Throughout all of our lives, most of us have had to contend with not belonging. And so we have this sense of, I just don't belong. And the fact of the matter is, we're kind of right. We talk about the neurotypical hive mind, and we don't belong in the hive mind, and they don't mind letting us know. Others, neurotypical people, letting us know either directly or more often indirectly, you don't belong. We don't want you here. Sometimes they do that through physical bullying. We'll talk about that some more in a little bit. In my case, it was very seldom physical bullying. I'm grateful for that, but it was more just ignore this guy. He's invisible. He doesn't belong. We don't acknowledge his existence. Speaking of me, I don't know if you've encountered that or not, but it's discomforting, and you just don't know where you belong, and you don't know how to belong. You don't know how to fit into that. So let's talk about these 3 ways that we can contend with this situation that I think all of us face, at least to some degree, probably most of us to a large degree. And number 1 is what I call know your worth. Richard Dawkins, you probably heard his name. He's a famous scientist. And he once calculated that your chance of existing is 1 in 400 trillion. I don't know how big that is. I know it's huge, but I don't know how big it is. But then there came along this blogger, and I'll try to find his name here. Let me see if I can see it real quick. On my screen, his name is David Taylor, and he took Richard Dawkins' numbers. He said, oh, wait a minute. You're doing this from a biological perspective, but what if we include, like the chances of your parents coming together at that specific time in that specific place? And the same thing is true of both of your grandparents and all 4 of your great-grandparents, and just go on forever, all the way back to the beginning of the dawn of humanity. The chances of you existing is 1 in about 400 quadrillion. I don't really know, but I know it's big, so I looked it up because I didn't know exactly how big that is. And what I found is that if you were to count, and they can't, but they can estimate, if you would count all the grains of sand on all the beaches on the planet, and add to that all the grains of sand and all the deserts on the planet, well, just throw in all the grains of sand that exist, you'd come up with a little bit more than 400 quadrillion. So let's put this in perspective. What are your chances of existing? Yeah, I got my glove on because compression glove goes my hand problem, which makes it hard to type, totally off topic. But what are your chances of existing? Well, let's do it this way. Supposing somebody said, I'm going to let you live, but under one condition. I have one specific grain of sand that I've dropped somewhere on the planet. I don't know, it may have been in the desert, may have been on a beach somewhere, may have been while traveling on the ocean and it fell in. I don't know where it is, but if you would go out and find that grain of sand on your first try, then I'll let you live because I want that grain of sand. But if you don't, then you can't live. And so, you got nothing to lose. I mean, if you don't go look, you've got no chance whatsoever. If you do go look, you got 1 chance in 400 quadrillion, which is about next to nothing. But still a chance. You go out and look. Wherever, maybe go to a beach and I'll just pick up this grain of sand and we'll take it back to him and see what happens. And you take it back to him and to his shock and amazement, it's the grain of sand that he lost. What are the chances? 1 in 400 quadrillion. That are the chances of you existing. In other words, you're special. Well, everyone's special. We're all special. But what are the chances of anybody existing? Well, it's like 1 in 100%. Somebody's going to exist, but it's not going to be you. Put this in perspective. When I was a teenager, I had a girlfriend. I know you look at me and you say, Ken, I find that hard to believe that you actually had a girlfriend. But I did. I had a girlfriend. And we were kind of serious. You know, I was 18. I think she was 16, 17. And we started talking marriage. We really didn't know. Kind of young, but we were talking about it. But things didn't work out. And we parted ways. Well, then I got my wife now. And we got 2 kids who are now in their 40s. And we got 4 grandkids. They're in their, 3 of them in their 20s. One of them's in their teens. If I had married my first girlfriend, my kids would not be here. There would be somebody else here. But that somebody else is not here because we didn't come together. So stop and think about this for a moment, how special you are, how special I am, how special every single human being on the earth is. That is why when I read about homicides in the newspaper, remember newspapers? Some of you probably don't, but it's like the internet, only it was on paper. It was kind of inconvenient, but we thought it was cutting edge technology, and it was at the time. Or, the news online, and you hear about homicides and read about homicides, they're taking the life of somebody who had 1 chance in 400 quadrillion of existing, and they're cutting that short. I think that's horrible. I think it's disgusting. We're special. We're very special. So number 1 is to know your worth. And your worth is like winning a lottery, and the prize is life. And the chance of winning the lottery is 1 in 400 quadrillion. And guess what? You won. Congratulations, you have tremendous worth. And when other people make you feel unworthy, stop and think. What are the chances of me being here? Number 2, I call this know your place. Stay in your lane. No, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Know your place, and your place is to be here at this time. This is something that I personally really struggle with. Because again, throughout all of my life, and I'm assuming this is true of a lot of you, or I wouldn't even bring it up, but throughout all of my life and your life and our lives, we've been made to feel like we don't fit. We don't have a place. And I was thinking about this when I was driving down I was going to call it a highway. It's really not a highway, it's a county road. But I was driving down a county road, and we were going over to visit my daughter and her family and looking at the field, and you have this field of weeds. Somebody didn't cut them down. I guess farmers didn't need the hay or whatever. And they let them grow. But dispersed throughout the weeds, there were flowers. Few and far between. And I stop and think, we're not just the wrong bee in the beehive, that hive mind, but we're also, to put a positive perspective on it, we're the flower in the field. We're very, very different, but that doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. And in some ways, I hate to say we're better than everyone else, but in a sense, yeah, we have things that we can contribute that other people cannot contribute. So I guess we could say, without being narcissistic, without being arrogant, we can say, yeah, we're better than everyone else. Well, because everyone is unique, everyone is better than everyone else in that perspective. So, number 1, know what your worth is. That's important. But number 2 is know what your place is. And your place may be in the field of weeds. It may not be in the beehive because, you're not that kind of bee. Could be your place is out in the field, being a flower, being pretty, contributing, when the bees need nectar, whatever it is they take, back to the hive to make honey. Who do they come to? They come to you, the flower out in the field. They don't go to the weeds, I don't think. I don't know that much about biology, but I don't think they go to the weeds. They come to the flowers. Sometimes you are the one that the bees rely on to do what they do. You're just not part of their hive. That's a wonderful thought. Number 3 is this. Know your, what I call, space. So number one is know your worth. Number two is know your place. And number three is know your space. I wish I could find a word for number one to replace worth that rhymes with space and place, but I couldn't think of one, so I just left it the way it was. But know your space. And they say that we are in our comfort zone. You've heard that before, and people say you need to get out of your comfort zone to grow, and I think that's very true, but I think there's a third space that is somewhere in between the first space and let's call it the inner space and the outer space, and that is the middle space. So I'm going to call that the gray zone. So we have our comfort zone, we have our discomfort zone, and then we have the middle zone. We have the gray zone. And sometimes we can't just plunge in to the outer zone, or discomforts, because it's just overwhelming, particularly with people with autism, because we can't be overwhelmed. I'm getting back in the spots again. I need to stay over here. We tend to be overwhelmed. So we need to not stay in our comfort zone. If we did that, I'd sleep and eat all the time. We need to get outside our comfort zone, but not quite into the discomfort zone. We need to get in that gray area where it's not quite as severe, not quite as tough, not quite as difficult. Now, I like to use exercise as an analogy. Now, yeah, I would encourage you to exercise if you're not, but you don't go in and lift the heaviest weight you can possibly lift. I mean, some guys do, but it's not highly recommended. What you have to do, if I understand the biology of weightlifting, is you have to start with moderate weights to get your body accustomed to lifting heavier weights. But I don't know anybody. I'm sure there's somebody, but I don't know anybody who is expert in this area who would say, go in and lift the heaviest weight you possibly can at the very first try. I don't know anybody who suggests you lift the heaviest weights that you possibly can ever. You always begin in the middle ground. And the same thing is true, I believe, of those of us with autism. As we begin to learn to work with the neurotypical world, we can't just plunge into it. We have to kind of nudge our way. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago about the challenge of saying hi to one person in the next 24 hours. And I think about this, and speaking to strangers, it's hard, it's awkward, it's difficult, but I've learned to do it because in my mind I'm thinking, I don't know these people. I'll probably never see them again. If they don't like me or they think I'm a little bit weird by the way I talk, does it really matter? Nah, not in the long run. And so I go ahead and I use them as my laboratory. I test on them. I'll say something to them and I'll get some feedback, how they responded, and I also get feedback on how did I do? How did my hi sound? When I say, how you doing? Sometimes it sounds very awkward. Even to me, I say good morning and it comes out odd, and people kind of look at me like, you said good morning odd, so you must be odd. And that's the way, they make that face, that autism face, or that neurotypical face, I should call it, that says, you're weird. And we can tell you are by the way that you talk, and so we're not going to like you. I don't care. I don't even know you. You're a stranger. I'm using you as a lab rat. In a sense, yeah. And why not do that? So number one is know what your worth is. You have tremendous worth. So does everybody. This is not, again, it's not arrogance or narcissism. Everybody is worth a lot. Number two, know your place. Knowing that you are the flower in the field, and the hive mind, the beehive, the neurotypical hive wouldn't exist without us flowers. We got our place. Yeah. And number three is know your space, and your space is not in your comfort zone. Your space is to start to expand your zone and make your comfort zone wider all the time. The more you get into that gray space, I have learned over my 70-some years of existence, The more I get into that gray space, the more it becomes my safe space. And so I can expand my safe space. Sorry, get out of the dots, and we'll see y'all next time.